Method number 5. Information was demanded from government. Method number 6. Discussions were organized on the issues being faced by India. So they were using constitutional methods of agitation. They were using peaceful methods of agitation. The moderates used to meet for 3 days in a year when Congress sessions were held. So Congress sessions were held mostly or almost every time on 28th, 29th and 30th of December. So they used to assemble for 3 days in session of Congress, but it does not mean that they were nationalist only for 3 days. The moderate politics was not a 3-day tamasha as Ashwini Kumar Dutt tries to condemn. Ashwini Kumar Dutt was a radical nationalist and he termed Congress as a 3-day tamasha. It was not a 3-day tamasha. For the rest of the year, the moderates were highlighting the issues through press, through petitions, prayers, by raising the issues in the city councils, by demanding information from government in different ways. So they were meeting in the sessions of Congress for 3 days, but Congress was not just a 3-day tamasha during moderate phase. That you need to keep in mind. What were the achievements of moderates? Achievement number 1. The moderates built the foundations of nationalist struggle. Moderates are often criticized that they achieved nothing, but this criticism is a result of the fact that foundations cannot be seen by everyone. In spite of the fact that building could be very massive, foundations are not visible to anyone. Without strong foundations, no massive superstructure can be constructed. So moderates are busy in the task of laying foundations. That is why their efforts cannot be seen or could not be seen by everyone except those who could understand, those who could enter into their shoe, those who could walk with them. So moderates built the foundations. That was the biggest contribution. The moderates spread nationalist awakening among the people through their writings and through their speeches. Gopal Krishna Gokhale used to say that our writings and speeches are not aimed at the government. Though we are criticizing government, but our intention is not to criticize the government. We do not expect the government will come under pressure. Our main intention is to spread awakening among the people of India so that the pressure on British will keep on increasing with the passage of time. Through their economic critique, the moderates exposed the true face of British rule. They shattered the myth of British paternalism. They destroyed the ideas like white man's burden. They proved that the British rule in India was essentially colonial and exploitative. So that was a very, very big contribution of moderates. The moderates contributed immensely to birth of extremism or extremist ideas in Indian nationalism. The extremist leaders were basically the children of moderates. Without the efforts made by moderates, the extremism would have never emerged in India. So Bal Gangadhar Tilak explained the notion of moderate and extremism in a very beautiful manner. He said that the extremists of today are the moderates of tomorrow. S.N. Banerjee was considered a radical. When we discussed the foundation of Congress, I told you that S.N. Banerjee was considered radical. But here S.N. Banerjee was a part of moderate, because moderate or extremism you have to see in relative terms. These moderates were extremists of their time. They were most radical Indians of their times. But when we compare them with the next generation, they were moderate, so they became moderates. So extremists of later times were the kids of these moderates only. Without their efforts, the extremism would have never emerged in India. The pressure built by moderates forced government, or at least compelled government, to appoint a public service commission. This commission was appointed to look into the functioning of civil services. This commission was headed by Charles Atkinson. So Charles Atkinson Commission was appointed in 1886 by the British government due to the efforts made by moderates to review the functioning of civil services in India. Appointment of Welby Commission in 1895 was another important achievement of moderates. Welby Commission was appointed in 1895 to suggest better management of Indian expenditure, or to suggest ways to reduce the military expenditure, the governmental expenditure, and to suggest ways to increase expenditure on developmental activities. In 1893, next point. In 1893, a resolution was introduced in British House of Commons. This resolution demanded simultaneous holding of civil services examination in India along with London. This resolution was introduced, it was not passed, but this resolution itself indicates the pressure or the influence carried by moderates. The biggest contribution of moderates was that they brought political maturity in India. They first brought political maturity in India, and because of this political maturity, the British rule kept on coming under greater and greater pressure of Indian nationalism. It was the continuation of this phase of this process of maturity that forced the British to leave India in 1947. So moderates started the process that ultimately culminated in the liberation of India from British rule in 1947. So their achievements were really very, very significant. Limitations or criticism of moderates. One important criticism of moderates is that they failed to create sufficient pressure on government or on British rulers. The methods used by moderates were too weak. The methods used by moderates were too weak to be effective. Their policy of petition, prayers, and memorandums did not have much effect on the British rulers. The moderates were insulted often by the British. They were ridiculed often by the British rulers, and they could do nothing because they did not have much pressure in their methods. The moderates failed to understand the significance of participation of masses in anti-British struggle. So there was no place for common people in the moderate struggle. The moderate could not envision any role of common masses in national struggle. The social base of moderate phase of national movement was very, very narrow. That was a big limitation. The moderates believed that only educated sections of population or educated class of India could contribute to the national movement or could contribute to the anti-colonial rule struggle. Next limitation. The moderates relied too much on conferences and discussions. The national movement during moderate phase was largely limited to conference halls and discussion chambers. It was an example of armchair nationalism. The moderates did not bring the struggle into the streets. They were raising the issues concerning India from the comfort of their houses, their offices. They did not come out and fight in the streets against British rule. That was also an important limitation. And the biggest limitation of moderate politics was that moderates failed to comprehend the true character of British rule. They were wrongly under the impression that British rule was just and fair. They were wrongly under the impression that British rule was good for India. Their notion that British rule was good for India was misplaced. So these were the limitations of national movements during moderate phase, or these were limitations of moderate politics. So depending on the language of question, you may have to write limitations first, and then you may have to write the contribution. If you have to critically examine the contribution of moderates to anti-British struggle, then you may start from here, and then you can go to the limitation. They achieved a lot, but achievement was not without limitations. If question says moderates were completely useless and failure, they were mendicants. Moderates were not mendicants. Moderate politics was not an example of mendicancy. That they were not beggars. These moderates were true nationalists. In that age, when British rule was so powerful, the foundations were so strong, coming out of the houses, raising voice against British was extremely risky. And these people, moderate leaders, were not the kind of common poor individuals that they had nothing to lose. They had everything to lose. They were rich and well-off people. And in spite of the fact that they were rich, they were prosperous, they were well-off, they came out of the houses. They raised their voice against British rule at a huge risk. So you cannot say that they were weak nationalists, they were mendicants, they did not have need, they were beggars. These are just abuses or wrong abuses hurled at moderates by the extremists of later times or by the colonial scholars. So moderates were true nationalists. The contribution of moderates was extremely significant. If you do not have foundations, no building can ever emerge. So moderates are basically the foundations of anti-British struggle. Now let us have a look at the extremist phase.